Sometimes, whenever you're doing your job, and you see another train across on the other track, that's what happened. This is the story of the Kismet siding train collision. It was around June of 2006. A BNSF manifest train in Richmond, California, 3 crew members were on duty to take this locomotive. It was around 8:25 p.m. that night. This was known as 4059 East, but around this time of hour, the train would consider 7 locomotives, which were exactly in order. BNSF C44-9W 4059 leading, NERX SD50 5473, which looked like a Conrail locomotive in its livery, a BNSF C44-9W-9 1065, a FURX SD40-2 8110, which is in its Burlington Northern livery, a BNSF EMD GP30U 2437, which is in a Santa Fe livery, which has that logo on it. BNSF SD40-2 7065, which is also a Burlington Northern livery. And finally, a third -9, which is a C44-9W 997, which is the third -9 locomotive on this manifest train ever. The train had departed Richmond, California around 10:35 p.m. But they only carry like 5 loads and 5 empties, but they would actually add more cars. But they would actually still drive around until the next morning on the 14th of June 2006. A couple hours later, the next train comes by. There's only like an engineer and a conductor. This BNSF train we refer to as 4479 West. It would carry, this one's a cement train, and it has only 4 -9s, which it has a few loads, and it was coming from Calwall, California. This train would have 4 locomotives, which were BNSF-9 C44-9W 4479 leading, a secondary dash line, which is BNSF 4715, which is in a Santa Fe war bonnet paint scheme, Norfolk Southern C40-9W 8967, which is the third dash line. At last, certainly not least, BNSF C44-9W 4576, which was the 4th dash line locomotive of the cement train. They departed Calwall just before 5 a.m., but little did anyone know, both trains were approaching Kismet siding. According to this camera footage that was recorded by the NTSB, or National Transportation Safety Board, actually it was recorded by the FRA. According to this, they're on board with 4479, which the train was going along until they approached the curve just up ahead. But they did not realize that they saw headlights up ahead. Thought that the train was going to slow down, let 4479 to be cleared, but no one did notice about this. Right after 4479 was getting close to the track, they saw 4059 not slowing down, but one of the crew members had jumped, but it was already too late. Both trains collided around 6 somewhere in the morning. The force of the impact caused 4479 to skid onto its side, causing the front end to be completely destroyed. While 4059 had suffered the damage from 4479, skidding onto the side off the tracks, causing only to suffer front end damage. Its plow was completely broken. But the damage wasn't too bad enough. 1065, who was the locomotive with 4059 East, had almost caused it suffered damage, but it was not too bad. Still run onto the service to this day. NREX, Conrail's livery locomotive, had suffered big damage, but it was a total loss, and it was scrapped. Norfolk Southern's 8976 didn't suffer any damage, but it didn't supply any kind of damage. 4715 only suffered nose and cab damage, and also suffered body damage, but it wasn't that bad. You could tell from the damage of 4479 having big nose and cab damage, but it wasn't that bad from the force of impact when it contacted with 4059.
An investigation was launched by the FRA instead of the NTSB, since likely it was because there were no fatalities. Both train crews were interviewed as soon as possible, with the exception of the engineer of 4479 West. The conductor of 4479 West's testimony matched what the onboard camera showed. He stated he thought he heard a mayday call over the radio as his train rounded the corner prior to East Kismet, and estimated they were 2,000 feet from the East Switch. When asked why he chose not to jump, he replied that there was not enough time and they were going too fast, contrary to what the crew of 4059 East did. He also stated that following the collision, the crew of 4059 made no attempt to help them. As for the 4059's crew, things would be much different in their interview. The engineer stated he was well rested, not tired, and that he and the conductor were calling signals. By then they had been on duty for over 9 hours until the collision, much less than 4479's crew, who were on duty for a mere 2 hours before impact. The engineer stated when the train left Sharon, milepost 1031.1, they were running on color, quote unquote. In other words, they were following the signals accordingly. The conductor indicated that as the sun was coming up, he was having trouble seeing the approach signal to Kismet, which was at an approach medium aspect. When they got near the west end of Kismet siding, the engineer stated it went from approach to clear, so he just kept going, track speed. The conductor, however, said he thought he saw the signal fluctuate and asked the engineer if it did or not.
It looked clear.
The brakeman stated he didn't remember what the signal indication was, nor did he call it. As they proceeded, the conductor wasn't paying attention anymore, relying on his engineer as his back was turned to put on some sunglasses. He then turned and noticed they were approaching East Kismet's red stop signal. He asked the engineer about it, but there was no response. He then sat down, where he had a clear view of the signal, and yelled at the engineer,
Hey, that's a red block.
After some dialogue between he and the engineer, the conductor saw the headlight of 4479 West, and quote unquote, that was when they plugged it. In other words, dumped the air and put the train into emergency. He acknowledged they were by a hard yellow at the west end of Kismet, and felt that the engineer did not react quickly enough to the red signal at East Kismet. The engineer stated East Kismet looked red, but didn't specify when exactly he made that determination. The brakeman also stated that with the sunlight, he and the crew could not determine the color of the signal at the east end of Kismet siding, but it also looked red. He then recalled someone asking about it, followed by the conductor yelling at him to go out the back door, and all 3 crew members bailed after that. So, was 4059's crew correct? Well, records showed the engineer of 4059 East was off duty for more than 81 hours, and the conductor was off duty in excess of 48 hours prior to reporting for duty in Richmond. The brakeman was off duty for a mere 12.5 hours. So they were likely still well rested, or appeared to be. The sunlight theory was tested by the FRA, and as you can see from this footage of similarly modeled signals in St. Denis, Maryland on CSX's Capitol subdivision, the sunlight could indeed obscure the signals of these Safe-Tran hooded signals, nicknamed Vaders by railfans because of its shape, which were also present at the accident site. The experiment was conducted on the morning of June 21st, 2006, in clear conditions virtually identical to those on the accident day, with BNSF-9-1107 as the guinea pig. The results pretty much destroyed the 4059 East's crew's theory about what had happened. The signals were all clearly visible by the representatives of BNSF, FRA, and the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers Union. The signals all worked as intended, and the sun didn't become a factor until 2 minutes after the collision would have occurred. So to sum it all up, the crew was evidently lying, but some people still debate whether their testimony was true or not. To add insult to injury, drug tests were performed on the crews, and all but one tested negative. The conductor of 4059 East tested positive for crack cocaine in his system, a highly dangerous, addictive, and illegal substance that can cause an immediate and intense but short high. This can not only cause frequent abuse of the drug, but increased heart rate, high blood pressure, paranoia, anxiety, and other effects. It's not known how long it was in his system, but regardless, it was recent enough to cloud his judgment during work hours. Sadly, precautions like random drug and alcohol testing that should have detected this were already put in place since 1988. After a set of Conrail locomotives operated by a crew stoned on marijuana missed a stop signal and were rear-ended in Chase, Maryland by an Amtrak passenger train on January 4th, 1987. This crash was one of the few cases that unfortunately slipped between the cracks of regulations, so it's fair to say there is always room for improvement, even today. As a result of the FRA's findings, the probable cause was the crew of 4059 East's failure to follow signal aspects accordingly leading up to the collision. The conductor having crack cocaine in his system was also a contributing factor, as obviously a narcotic like that can affect one's ability to perform major tasks. However, the toxicology results can't draw any clear conclusions concerning either impairment, let alone when the drug was taken. The blood tests only contain the inactive elements which are not normally associated with impairment. Neither impairment nor time of exposure to the drug can also be derived from the urine tests. Still, it is worth noting. The sunlight factor and possible signal malfunction factors were also quickly dismissed, but not entirely out of left field. What do you think? After the accident, it was never stated what became of the train crew members of both trains involved, let alone if the conductor who tested positive for crack was given any criminal punishment. All the locomotives involved were amazingly repaired and returned to service, all except for the NREX 5473, which was scrapped shortly afterwards. Most of the BNSF-9s involved continue to serve under BNSF, either in their original liveries or repainted to the current H3 livery. BNSF 4479 and 4576 were among the units leased to BNSF by GECX. They were eventually returned to GE to be rebuilt and are now on Canadian National's fleet as AC-44C6Ms 3355 and 3397 respectively. Norfolk Southern 8967 was also rebuilt into an AC-44C6M, renumbered to 4208. FURX 8110 was sold off to Webb Asset Management and currently resides at the Kansas and Oklahoma Railroad as of 2017. BNSF 2437 was retired by BNSF in 2020 and sold to LTEX. It was last spotted in La Crosse, Wisconsin as of 2022. BNSF 7065 was retired in 2008 and sold to Helm Leasing, where it eventually ended up onto Norfolk Southern, renumbered to 3517. As of today, though, it has been rebuilt with a Norfolk Southern Admiral cab, now an SD40-3, numbered 6431.
19 years had passed since the accident, and this became one of the worst, or close to being one of the worst accidents in BNSF history.
Element.